Hi, it's Dan Eisner here with Key Insight Coaching, and I'm back with the 7 gateways to unlocking your inner peace and potential. And today we're talking about gateway number 4. It's all about communication, but it doesn't start with the words. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. One of the most common piece of advice that we hear on a regular basis is we just have to think positive. Well, if you've ever tried to think positive, it's not always so easy to do that. I think there's kind of a funny reason why it's not so easy to do that. And here's a great analogy that explains this. This is from Debbie Ford, who's a very well-known author. She says, we can put ice cream on top of poop as much as we want, but eventually we're going to taste the poop. I know it's kind of a disgusting analogy, but it points to a very real truth. And that truth is that it doesn't matter how positive, how much positive thinking we do, if we don't first acknowledge what we're feeling beneath the surface, all the positive thinking in the world is not going to make any difference. This is why we talked about the idea of radical acceptance earlier, before we talked about the idea of changing our communication and thinking positive. Because we have to first acknowledge what we're feeling if we wish to use our communication to improve the way that we feel. But even acknowledging what we're feeling isn't quite enough. We really have to understand a little bit about how communication works. What most of us aren't aware of is that communication has very little to do with the words. They've proven that, words only account for about 7% of communication. The rest is, of course, nonverbal communication. That, of course, in turn, involves how we're using our body language, how we're using eye contact, and things like that. But we're going to go a little bit deeper than that right now, because today we're not even going to focus on communication in terms of other people. We're going to start with how we communicate with ourselves. And what most of us don't realize is that what we say, even the words that we use and the thoughts that we use, don't matter nearly as much as the energy behind the words that we're saying. As an example, I might tell myself a positive message like, I am grateful for my health. But if I say I'm grateful for my health, that's the energy behind what I'm saying doesn't really match the words, and so it's probably not going to make any difference. But if I can train myself to say, I am grateful for my health, it's a totally different thing. But that's not something that we do so much of the time. Again, as we've discussed in previous gateways, we don't often pay attention to the energy that we're using on a regular basis. And so we're going to talk about how communication starts internally. And I love this idea that thoughts become things, and we want to choose good ones. Thoughts become things. What I mean by that is thoughts become chemicals, meaning emotions in our brain and body that affect the way that we feel. Now, most of us don't recognize is that we have approximately 60,000 thoughts per day. But the truth is, most of the time, we're not so aware of our thoughts, and we're not so aware of how they're affecting the energy in our body. A very common technique that you can try, with a friend is what's called muscle testing. It's kind of being illustrated in this picture here. If you were to ask a friend to raise his or her arm up like this, and you were asking him to say a particular thing, and you could make it not even something emotional, but something that's not true. Like, for example, you could say, say your name is John, when the guy's name is Steve. And if you tried to push down on his arm and ask him to resist you, you would be able to break his strength very easily. The reason is because he's saying something that's not true. He's saying something that's incongruent with who he is. Well, by the same token, anytime we have a negative thought, whether we're aware of that thought or not, it's having the same effect on the body, meaning it's weakening our bodies, even if we're not paying attention to it. And again, so much of the time, we are so trapped in our thoughts, and I love how this guy's got his little hand on his left brain, because that's really what happens is we get so trapped in our left brain, inside our thinking brain, inside our thinking mind, that we're not so aware of how that's affecting us and how it's affecting our bodies and how it's making us feel. So the key to really start to improve our communication is really to become the observer, to really start observing our own thoughts. We can't possibly improve the way we communicate without first starting right there. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we can do that. So, and when we start to observe, we really start to become more aware of the thoughts that are running through our head, then we can start to become aware of how they're affecting us, how they make us feel. One of the great little tools that I learned, this is from Susan Jeffers, and it came from her book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, is that she says that words really come between what she calls a pain to power sort of spectrum. So I'm going to ask you to just close your eyes for a second here, and I'm going to repeat these phrases, and I'm going to ask you to tune into your body, and then we're going to talk about what happened in just a minute. So go ahead and close your eyes and just pay attention to the words that I'm about to say. Life is a struggle. Life is a journey. It's not my fault. I am responsible. It's not my problem, or it's a problem. It's an opportunity. Now, I'll go ahead and open your eyes. What I ask people to do when I'm in person is say, did you notice anything as I said these words and phrases? More often than not, somebody in the room will say, yes, I really did. One was negative and one was positive. And a lot of times I'll say, well, okay, well, how did you know that? And it's really interesting because a lot of times people say, well, struggle is negative and journey is positive. But that's not really the whole truth. Is how did you really know? And when we get down to the core is that they felt it in their body. Even just the word struggle literally has an effect. It literally has a chemical effect on how we feel. It's a negative one. And when we say journey, that has a positive effect. Now, this is just one example, but these, again, all the words that we're saying are having an effect, even if we're not aware of it. Now, again, we have 60,000 thoughts a day, so this is happening, again, whether we're aware of it or not. Now, you may not have noticed, any difference at all when I said those words or phrases. And if you didn't, that's okay. That's just a good indication that you weren't as tuned into your body as you could be. And the point of this is we want to start paying attention. We want to start feeling be observing what we're thinking and paying attention to how it makes us feel. That is the absolute key to beginning to improve our communication. Then we can start using, what a lot of us has heard of, which is called affirmations. And affirmations are, this is by dictionary.com, the assertion that something exists or is true. I also like to think of it as a positive statement of intent. So these are some affirmation facts that I like to talk about. The first one is affirmations are just like advertisements, meaning whatever we keep telling ourselves, we're eventually going to buy. Advertising isn't a billion-dollar industry for no reason. They recognize that they have to keep on, introducing these ideas into our minds to get us to buy them. And even some of the largest companies in the world, like Coca-Cola and McDonald's, you would think, well, they could just stop because everyone knows them so well, but they don't. They keep pushing their advertising because they want us to buy. Well, the same thing holds true for what we keep telling ourselves. We have to keep repeating these things for them to actually, for us to actually start believing them. So the second fact is that affirmations have a chemical effect on the body. When it's the right affirmation, it literally changes the way that we feel. The words we just said before sort of illustrated that fact. And the third fact I'd like to talk about is, again, they require repetition to program into the body. It's not something we can say once or 10 times or maybe not even 100 times. We have to keep programming these things in until they become so natural for us that we don't even have to think about it anymore. So let's talk about, well, how do you choose your affirmations? Well, I like to think about affirmations in a couple different ways. There's a lot of what I like to call general affirmations that are sort of, blanket affirmations or things that I think are always valuable to say or always valuable to sort of program into our body. So some of these, there's millions of them that we could choose from. Here are just a couple examples. Is I am becoming more aware, or I am taking responsibility for how I feel, or I am allowing myself to be at peace. These are just, again, general examples. But what I think can be even more effective is what I like to call using specific or counterbalance affirmations. And what we do when we use counterbalance affirmations is we pick a particular area that might be difficult for us, and then we come up with an affirmation that specifically addresses that particular area. As an example, if I have a problem with somebody at work, I might want to keep telling myself, I am calmly responding to my colleague. I am calmly responding to my colleague. Or if I have problems in traffic, I might want to tell myself, I am taking a deep breath when I am in traffic. Or if I know maybe I'm not being as great a parent as I could be, as an example, I might want to say, I am taking better care of me so I can be a better parent. Again, there's millions of affirmations that we can choose from. The point is to find ones that, again, actually work for us and really address where we are. Well, how do you know that? How do you know if it's working? Well, it just feels good. And a lot of times when I'm working with people and I make suggestions, and if they have difficulty coming up with some of them on their own, a lot of times I'm just looking at them and they're not really, they can tell that it just doesn't feel right. And all of a sudden I might say something and boom, they just start smiling, and I can tell that one hit exactly where they are. And that's really what we need to learn to do for ourselves, is to pay attention to our body and notice how these different, affirmations that we're using are making us feel. I also like to think of affirmations as kind of like music. Depending on the particular mood that we're in, we're going to want to play different songs. So it's something that we can really use in a lot of different ways, but we have to really, again, pay attention to where we are at in any particular moment, and then choose our affirmations based on that. Okay. So as you've already gathered from now, from what we've talked about, communication really starts with understanding, and it really starts with understanding where we are at internally. One of my favorite quotes is, "Seek first to understand, then be understood," and that's by Stephen Covey. But one of the ways I like to explain is that, and again, it really starts with understanding ourselves. We can't begin to understand another person if we don't first understand where we are coming from in any given moment. As an example, if you've ever told somebody, I feel bad, and they said to you, well, don't feel bad, you shouldn't feel bad, you probably noticed that didn't feel very good. And that's a very core example of just how much what happens when we don't understand where we are and we try to relate to another person. So I'm going to explain these little lines here at the bottom of this page to illustrate what I'm talking about. So let's say that these lines represent a timeline. And that circle represents an emotional moment, or a moment where maybe we're not so aware of something. And that little line there after it represents, that we hit a wall. We've all heard that expression, we hit a wall. So if a friend comes to you and they are in an emotionally stuck place, if you don't first understand what you're feeling, if you don't understand, maybe you're not comfortable with what they're feeling, or you're so determined on helping that person, and you might offer them advice, you can see that nothing much is going to happen, because you're not even aware of how you're communicating to them, and you're just trying to help them, that you haven't first really understood where they are. But if you start by paying attention to your own thoughts, and you notice, wait a second, I'm so busy trying to help them, and I can feel this tendency in me, then I'm not really listening and understanding where they are. There's not much I can do. But if you start to pay attention to that, what happens is you literally clear that. You then become like an open book. You then listen entirely with your whole being. And then you can do something that's going to help that person to understand you're going to demonstrate to that person that you understand where he or she is, and then you might be able to offer them something that could be really useful. But it all starts with that understanding. It all starts with first you understanding yourself, and then you being able to show your friend that you understand where he or she is at. So I know this might not have been what you were expecting when you thought about communication, but we really can't begin to communicate with others if we don't first understand how we're communicating with ourselves. So this was the fourth gateway. Again, it's all about communication, and it all starts internally. I hope you got some nice value out of it. Next week, I'm going to be back with the fifth gateway, which is understanding the shadow effect. In the meantime, I'd love to hear your comments and feedback, and if you have any questions, please feel free to write in. I love to hear them. And thank you so much for tuning in.